Well, good morning. My name is Jake Forsyth, and I'm the Ministry Program Director here at Summit Church in Durango, Colorado. And welcome to our Friday morning devotion. It's a beautiful day outside. Feels like spring's getting closer each day, and I'm excited about that. I want to get outside more and enjoy some sunshine. And assuming some of you at least are with me there. So wherever you're joining us from, we welcome you today and hope you're doing well. We start our time off each time with glory sightings, which is just celebrating where we have experienced God's glory lately. So if you have any glory sightings you want to share, please do so in the chat box. We also talk about Hope Encounters on Fridays. We call it Bringing Hope Friday. And where have you been able to bring hope to others or experienced hope yourself? Where have others brought hope to you lately? So if you want to share one of those things or any of those things in the comment section, please do. I know for me, my glory sighting is a friend of mine, a church member who has served on many of the volunteer lead teams that I have been part of over the years, named Rose. Just got home yesterday from being in Colorado Springs, battling having surgery for a tumor she had to have removed, and now she's going through treatments, and she's finally back home where she can finish her treatment here in Durango at home with her family and loved ones around her. So that's a glory sighting for me. And Rose, I hope you're doing well, and hope to see you again soon. So today we are actually going to be reading out of Mark 5, 35 through Mark 6:6. This is a passage that Pastor Jeff actually preached on this past weekend. So that's the first time I've been able to do the Friday devotion on the same passage that we went over and spent time in on the weekend prior. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to give you a little background before we get into this passage, though, just to set things up, especially if you weren't able to join us this past weekend. So basically, where we're going to start reading, right before that, Jesus, he has been approached by this leader in the synagogue named Jairus. And Jairus tells Jesus that his 12-year-old daughter is at home dying. And he basically begs Jesus to go with him to his house so that he can lay his hands on So Jesus can lay his hands on Jairus' daughter and heal her before she dies. And so, as Jeff pointed out so well in the sermon, Jesus begins this journey with Jairus, but he doesn't seem to be in a big hurry to get there. He just calmly starts walking with Jairus towards his house. And in the meantime, there's all this huge crowd because Jesus has been healing people and word spreading, and there's this huge crowd just surrounding Jesus and kind of like begging for him to heal them, and all this commotion is going on. And there's this woman who has been hemorrhaging for 12 years and has been to all these doctors, and no one can figure out what's wrong with her, and no one can help her, and she's just desperate. And she is in the crowd, and she sees Jesus walking, and she has this idea that if she could just get close enough to Jesus to touch the fringe of his robe, that she would be healed of this illness that she'd been suffering with for so long. And so she manages to make her way to Jesus, and she touches his robe, and immediately Jesus feels this healing power go out from him, and he stops in the middle of all this commotion with this crowd around him, and he asks this question, "Who touched me?" And this is a funny part of the story. His disciples who are with him basically just laugh at him, and they sarcastically tell him, "There's this huge mob of people pressing in on you. How can you possibly even ask that question, 'Who touched me?' That would be impossible to know. Everybody's touching you, Jesus. Everybody's pressing in on you. What are you talking about?" And eventually, this woman admits that she's the one who touched Jesus's robe, And then Jesus has this beautiful and touching response to her. He says this, he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." And now remember, so that's beautiful. And this woman's faith that Jesus could heal her, Jesus tells her that your faith has made you well. Go in peace. And but remember, all of this is taking place while Jesus is walking with Jairus to his house to go heal his daughter who's on her deathbed. And can you imagine? I can't help but wonder what was going through Jairus's mind this whole time while this scene plays out. He had to be thinking, "Are you kidding me, Jesus? Can we please be going? My daughter needs you right now. Why are you stopping? We don't have time for this." He had to have been thinking that. I know I would have. And so that's the background to today's scripture that we'll pick up in Mark 35. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to read Mark 35, Mark 5:35 through 6:6. It says, "While he was still speaking to her," this is the woman that that um, that was healed from touching Jesus' robe. "While he was still speaking to her, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. They told him, 'Your daughter is dead. There is no use troubling the teacher now.' But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, 'Don't be afraid, just have faith.' Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. He went inside and asked, 'Why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. She's only sleeping.' The crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave, and he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, 'Talitha cum,' which means, 'Little girl, get up.' And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. They were overwhelmed and totally amazed. Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened, and then he told them to give her something to eat. Jesus left that part of the country and returned with his disciples to Nazareth, his hometown. The next Sabbath, he began teaching in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. They asked, 'Where did he get all this wisdom and the power to perform such miracles?' Then they scoffed. 'He's just a carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. And his sisters live right here among us.' They were deeply offended and refused to believe in him. Then Jesus told them, 'A prophet is honored everywhere except in his hometown and among his relatives and his own family.' And because of their unbelief, he couldn't do any miracles among them except to place his hands on a few sick people and heal them. And he was amazed at their unbelief." So, once again, there's a lot in this passage that we need to cover today. So, as I was reflecting on this passage this week and reflecting on Jeff's sermon a bit, the first point that I wanted to share with you all today is actually this week's memory verse comes from this section. It's Mark 5:36b, and it's, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." And that's what I even titled this today's devotion is, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." Those are powerful words that Jesus shared with Jairus when Jairus approaches him and tells him what's going on with his daughter. And then Jesus seems not to be in a hurry and has this peace about him, and even stops to heal this woman and have this conversation with this woman. Then all these people show up and they tell him, "Don't worry about it. There's no use. Your daughter has died." And Jesus comforts Jairus by telling him those words and telling him to not listen to these other voices, these outside voices that are speaking to him about his daughter, and to just remain focused on Jesus and to keep his faith that he first had when he first approached Jesus, believing that Jesus would heal his daughter. So at one point in time, Jairus had this faith. He's like, I know what my daughter needs. She needs Jesus. I'm going to find him. I'm going to have him come heal her. And Jesus says, hold on to that. Just keep that faith. And ironically, that's the same kind of faith that the woman in this story had when she approached Jesus and touched his robe. She too had this faith that Jesus would heal her, that was the answer she needed to her prayers and to her suffering. So that was point number one. Point number two that I pulled out is that Jesus wasn't afraid to risk looking like a fool. He had faith in God the Father and walked boldly into Jairus' home uh, with all the commotion going on and all the weeping and everybody, being devastated by this little girl dying. Jesus walked in that home with a boldness and wasn't afraid to look like a fool. And he knew that he was going to heal this girl and bring her back to life. And so he wasn't worried about looking like a fool. He trusted God's plan. He knew what was going to happen, and therefore he had this boldness about him. And it made me wonder, how many times have I, or how many times have you felt a nudge from God to do or say something, especially something publicly with a crowd of people around, but you were afraid, or I was afraid of looking like a fool or being laughed at or criticized. And so that kind of stood out to me, that Jesus had this boldness about him, and he trusted his mission and that God had laid before him, and wasn't afraid to speak publicly, and even have people, it says the crowd laughed at him and mocked him. But he wasn't afraid of that type of stuff. Also, point number three, I'm going to reread Mark 5:41 through 42 real quick, and then we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more. It says, holding her hand, Jesus said to her, Talitha cum, which means little girl, get up. And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. They were overwhelmed and totally amazed. And so back in 2012, I had the privilege of taking a group of 12 youth and 8 adults from this church on a mission trip to Kenya. Our church had been serving there and sending mission teams over there for years by then. And when our group got together, our youth group got together that year to plan our mission trip, that's the place that God laid on our hearts to go. And so we were able to make that happen, and we were so blessed to go. And it's just always a fond memory. It was actually the last youth thing I did as the youth pastor here before I moved into the position I'm in now. So it's always a fond memory. But one of the places that we served while we were over there was a place called Spring Valley Slum. This was a slum that was built on a dump that a bunch of refugees actually had to move into and start living in because they were driven off their land by the government at the time. And it was just it was a small area with a lot of people. It was just mind-boggling how many people lived in this little 1 square mile area that used to be a dump. And we had the privilege of being able to worship there in a church that was started by a man named Pastor Stanley and his wife Alice. So we got to worship there. We got to teach Sunday school there to the children, which was like hundreds of children. We got to go through the slum and take some food packages and to some people and pray for them, and it was just powerful. But Pastor Stanley and Alice, they started this church in the middle of the slum, and they immediately saw the need to start a food program because there's so many children in the slum were dying at that time from malnutrition and starvation. And so they started this church, and then immediately they started a school and a feeding program so that the kids that came to their school there at the church, they could feed them a meal. And for most of those kids, that was the only meal they got that day. So we got to even feed the kids while we were there. It was just amazing to see these kids knowing that that's, this porridge and an egg and a piece of bread that we gave them was the only meal they were going to have that day. So powerful. But eventually, our church even helped provide funds for a dormitory for the girls. A lot of the girls that were part of the school and living in the slums there were being raped and abused at night. And so Stanley and Alice decided to start raising funds to build a dormitory so that these girls could have a place to stay at night and be safe. And the name that they chose for this dorm was Talitha Kum. Uh, and that comes directly from this passage today. So every time I read this passage, I can't help but think of that. I actually have a wall on my, or a picture on my wall in the office of all the girls that ended up being able to stay in the dorm. They're standing in front of the dorm after it was completed, after our church was able to raise the funds and pay for the dorm to be built. I have a picture of all the girls standing in front of it in their school uniforms, and it's I see it every day. So, but anyhow, Stanley and Alice, they felt the need to provide this safe place for these girls, and they used that. They named it Talitha Kum because it means little girl get up, and they saw this as a way to help these young women get back up on their feet and give them hope again for their future. So I love that, and every time, like I said, I read this passage, I remember our time there in Spring Valley Slum and all the youth and adults on our team feeding those children lunch and taking food to those homes and praying for those people, and just it was a powerful experience. So I just want to share that with you. And since then, I also since that time, since our team was there in 2012, I know they've also raised money and added a dorm for the boys there who were also being abused and needed a safe place. So Stanley and Alice and their son Jesse and a bunch of their team do amazing things there in the middle of this slum area that you would not believe unless you were there. How um, how poor those people are, and how that church and that school and that feeding program and those dorms have brought life to a place where there was a lot of darkness. So just want to share that with you all today in case you didn't know about that. And then the last point that I want to make is that after all this happens, after Jesus heals this 12-year-old girl in her home, and he leaves and he goes back to his hometown of Nazareth, it says, and it says he began to teach in the synagogue again, and unfortunately the people in his hometown rejected him because they couldn't believe that Jesus, this guy that they'd known since he was a baby, was actually the Messiah. They just couldn't wrap their minds around that. They saw these and heard about these miracles he was doing, and they're like, no, not this guy, not Jesus, son of Mary. And it says, I'm going to read verses 5-6 again. It says, let's see, there we go. And because of their unbelief, he couldn't do any miracles among them except to place his hands on a few sick people and heal them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. So what a sad passage. It seems that, so Jesus goes back, these people don't, into his hometown, these people don't believe him. They're like, no, he's Mary's son. He's not the Messiah. He's not anything special. And it seems that this passage seems to suggest that Jesus' healing powers weren't available to him in Nazareth due to the town's overwhelming unbelief in him for some reason. It says he wasn't able to perform. Now, maybe that was a conscious choice. I don't know. But it says he wasn't able to perform except for a few healings when he laid some hands on people. But other than that, he wasn't even able to do some of those miracles that he was doing in these other places. And it was because of their unbelief. And that's just a sad passage to me, and it even says that Jesus himself was even amazed at their level of unbelief. And I know a couple years ago when we went to the Holy Land, we went to Nazareth, and It's a big back in Jesus's day. I'm told by Jeff and others that it was a very small village and there wasn't a whole lot there, and it was even kind of this um, place that most people in the region didn't respect the people from there, and it's just like this small little thing, insignificant town. But it's a very large place now, and lots of people live there, and um, we were even able to go up onto this uh, hill there that has this pretty sharp drop off cliff, and it's the place where in the passages you'll read about how they wanted to throw him off the cliff, those people in his hometown, because they didn't believe him. And so we got to be there and see that and experience that. But it's a remarkable town now. But it just when you read these words that Jesus wasn't able to help the people in his hometown because of their level of unbelief, it's just a sad thing to think about for me. And I'm sure it broke Jesus' heart too, to know that um, his own people, the people he'd grown up with for the past 33 years or so, that they didn't believe who he was. And it had to have been tough on his family too, and his mom Mary and dad Joseph. And so when I read that passage, it's kind of a sad passage for me. I don't know about you, but not one of my favorite passages to read about, for sure. But it also begs some questions, for us. And so I'll leave you, like I always do, with a few questions. And the first question is, how is Jesus' power over even death a source of hope and confidence for you and for me as we face life with all its uncertainties and all its struggles? So how is Jesus' power over death a source of hope for us in the midst of what we face day to day, even now, 2,000 years later? The other question, in what ways did the people of Nazareth saying, "Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon?" How does that express uh, doubt about Jesus' messianic claim? Um, so even his own people, his closest friends and people he'd grown up with, um, doubted and that Jesus was the Messiah. So um, that's just something to think about. Where is our level of doubt? Sometimes, do we have doubts? And if so, are we able to move past those and really get back to um, trusting that Jesus is who he said he was? So, and then why would Jesus's work to address physical and spiritual bondage, poverty, and blindness repulse his hometown? So why do you think they were so offended or had such doubt that these things, these healings that Jesus had been doing, that they've been hearing about and even seeing a little bit, why would that offend them so bad? Why would that offend these people in his hometown so bad? Was it jealousy? Was it envy? Was it just being blind to reality? I don't know. That's just a question I've been thinking about. And then the last question I'll leave you with is, does our level of belief or unbelief in Jesus today affect how Jesus responds to us when we need him? So we read about this level of unbelief that the people in his hometown of Nazareth had, and how it affected Jesus' ability to heal them, or maybe willingness to heal them. So does our level of belief or unbelief in Jesus affect how he responds to us when we need healing? I don't know, but something to definitely ponder and think about. Um, so I will leave you today with our memory verse, which is Mark 5:36b, and it is an easy one. So we should all be able to remember this one and memorize this one and be able to even lean on this one in times where we are in doubt or are in unbelief. And it is, don't be afraid, just have faith. Don't be afraid, just have faith. All right, well, it was good to be with you all this morning. Hope you're doing well. And I look forward to seeing you next time, which I'll be back on in a couple of weeks, but Rob will be here next Friday. So have a great weekend.